There we go, the recording's just started.
Yeah. Can I thank the Deputy Chief Constable Kieran Irving and members of the senior leadership team for joining me today to participate in this public accountability meeting. The focus of this meeting will be around alcohol-related antisocial behaviour. As your elected Police and Crime Commissioner, I actively encourage the input of residents of County Durham and Darlington in my public accountability meetings. Asking pertinent and relevant questions of the force helps me to deliver an efficient and effective police service for our communities and one that delivers on the needs of all of our residents. Prior to my election as Durham Police and Crime Commissioner, I reached out to the people of County Durham and Darlington to ask them what my police and crime priorities should be. They clearly told me that antisocial behaviour was one of their main residents' concerns. It was actually the top concern that they had. This was further reinforced during the consultation exercise earlier this year when I took the difficult decision to increase the police precept by £10. This is a time when 91.4% of residents who responded to the survey considered tackling antisocial behaviour as a priority, and 44.8% expressed concern about groups of people in public spaces causing harassment, alarm and distress. And 34.9% were concerned about alcohol, drugs and related antisocial behaviour. As your elected Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm committed to improving the channels to make it easier and faster to report crime and antisocial behaviour to the police and appropriate agencies, by giving residents the confidence and assurance they need to report issues. Good local intelligence enables analysts to provide neighbourhood and specialist teams with timely and accurate information that identifies hotspots of crime. This in turn facilitates effective multi-agency problem-solving approaches, which enables us, along with our partners, to develop local solutions to local problems. Resilient and confident communities are more likely to report crime and antisocial behaviour, and they are also more likely to work with others to prevent crime and disorder. I want to make our communities feel safe and have the confidence in working together. Over the last few weeks, in giving my ongoing commitment to being open and transparent in conducting my duties, I have given the residents of County Durham and Darlington the opportunity to put forward any questions and comments to me about alcohol-related antisocial behaviour. My office has selected a few of the common themes and comments that residents would like Durham Constabulary to respond to in more detail. For the purpose of this meeting, a full recording, including all questions and answers, will be uploaded on YouTube, and after this meeting will be made available to the public. Previous accountability meetings where the PCC holds the Chief Constable and the force to account for your policing in the area have not been open to the public or recorded, but as your elected PCC, I wanted to address the current situation by being more open, accountable and transparent in the delivery of my duties and decision making. The recorded meetings will enable residents to see how the accountability process works and the role the PCC plays in delivering an efficient and effective police service by scrutinising the performance of the force and ensuring it is responsive to the needs of residents of County Durham and Darlington. I trust this new progressive approach will enable me to give residents the opportunity to raise what matters most to them, so I can hold the Chief Constable to account on their behalf and make County Durham and Darlington safer, stronger and more resilient to crime and antisocial behaviour. It will be useful for me to talk through the format of this meeting and who is in attendance today at this accountability meeting. In a few minutes, I will invite Deputy Chief Constable Kieran Irving to say a few words and provide some operational context and background information around this subject. There will then be a 20-minute presentation delivered by Superintendent Neil Bickford and Chief Inspector Vicky Martin, Local Policing Command. Following this presentation, I will read out a selection of questions that have been sent to me by the residents of County Durham and Darlington, and I will direct them to the Deputy Chief Constable and his team to provide responses. This meeting is expected to last no longer than 90 minutes, and I do hope that the members of the public will find the content of the presentation useful to assist them having a better understanding about how I will continue to hold the force to account to address local policing issues and to ensure Durham Constabulary is efficient and effective police force. I'm now going to hand over to the Deputy Chief Constable, Kieran Irving, to say a few words. Thank you. Over to you, Kieran.
Good morning, Joy, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, thank you for offering me the opportunity just to say a few words in advance of the presentation from Neil and Vicky. And of course, we're very happy to answer the questions that will follow and give the public of Durham, the public of the county, the best opportunity to understand the work that we're doing in this area. Of course, antisocial behaviour can be something that blights communities and can cause significant misery for individuals right the way across the force area. And in many instances, that antisocial behaviour is fuelled by alcohol and other substance use. And in particular, today we're going to talk about the impact of alcohol and where that's most prevalent across the force area. In amongst the many things that we deal with, the significant importance that we hold in terms of building and maintaining community confidence and ensuring that those people who live and work in our areas are satisfied with the work that the force puts in. We take the instance of antisocial behaviour extremely seriously. We have a significant amount of dedicated resource allocated to problem solving and preventative work across the force area, alongside our officers and staff who respond to calls for service. Of course, the demands upon policing are ever increasing. The work that we do right the way across the board has got increasing complexity, but this doesn't take away from how importantly we consider and seek to treat those people who report instances of antisocial behaviour. I think probably opportune for me, if you're happy, to hand over to Neil and Vicky. I would say because of the complexity and the wide-ranging nature of this, it may be that the presentation runs slightly longer than 20 minutes, because we just want to give the public a flavour, and especially, as you mentioned, the amount of interest there is in this particular topic. We really want to deliver the best possible information package that we can. So it may run a little bit longer, but we'll try our best to keep it succinct, and also to ensure that we cover the questions adequately when they come. So if you're content, I shall hand over to Neil and Vicky.
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, very content. And I think what we found with these recorded sessions, the input from the officers has been really detailed and significant. So it's not just about today. This is over the course of my term in office that we can point people to this recording and get a really detailed response about something that's really important to the residents of County Durham. So yeah, happy to hand over to Neil and Vicky.
Thank you.
Thank you, boss. Good morning, everyone. I'm Neil Bickford from the Local Policing Command, and I've got strategic responsibility for the Constabulary's alcohol licensing unit. But in addition to that, I also have responsibility for Neighbourhood Policing Command and a significant number of the PCs and PCSOs across the county, who are often the first responders to ASB incidents that come into police. I'm joined today by my Chief Inspector, Vicky Martin, who's got functional responsibility for the unit, and she might field any questions you might have on the same.
Yes, I'll cover the operational side. Could we have the presentation on the screen, please? And we'll switch our camera on, off, and we'll do the talking.
Thank you, Ashley. So, as we know, antisocial behaviour covers a broad range of issues.
We don't want we don't want that view, because all the notes. Can we have the just the not the full view? Can we just have the slide view, please? Don't think everybody needs to see our notes.
That's right. Ashley, have you got presentation view, please?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, good morning everyone. So as we know, antisocial behaviour covers a broad range of issues, and it's behaviour that causes nuisance, harassment, alarm and distress to individuals and the community. And I begin by echoing what the deputy said earlier. We take all reports of antisocial behaviour seriously, particularly ASB that is fueled by alcohol. We're really aware of how alcohol can be a catalyst, not just for ASB, but for increased offending and vulnerability more generally. Over and above that, we're fully aware of the public health impact of problem drinking, particularly locally and regionally, and the specific concentration of alcohol dependency in the northeast and alcohol-related mortality in County Durham as well. Can we go on to 2 slides ahead, please, Ashley? Thank you. So there's a wide range of alcohol-related ASB incidents, but there are a few broad typologies which make for the vast majority of our calls into the police. First of all, we have underage drinking, which is sometimes classified as street drinking. This relates to drinking in public spaces, which are predominantly by youths who can't drink in licensed premises. And as a consequence, when drinking in public areas, their behaviour is deemed as antisocial. We then have ASB that's linked to the nighttime economy, and this is classified as alcohol consumed on or off licensed premises, bars or pubs between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. We know that participants in the nighttime economy drink more than the national average. They drink at levels which are above average for their age group. So in addition to crime and vulnerability linked to the nighttime economy, there's also significant ASB complaints in relation to noise from venues, in relation to litter, and overspill from bars and pubs. Then we have problematic drinkers, predominantly in the city, and that's often linked to aggressive begging. And then there's a very specific issue that we face in Durham City of transient noise, which is attributed to the student population. As you would expect, there's significant ongoing activity in relation to all of these issues, and we'll cover what our activity is later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So what do the stats say? Well, this slide shows 3 charts which will hopefully contextualise ASB and alcohol demand on the Constabulary. And you'll note from the bar chart at the bottom that of the over the last 12 months, of the approximate 160,000 calls for service to the Constabulary, around 20% of those calls have some degree of alcohol tag related to them. So that equates to around 32,000 calls have some degree of alcohol linked to it. Of those figures, 2,500 were tagged as alcohol-related ASB, and drilling down further, around 500 was specifically youth-related ASB. What I would say at this juncture is I'd really caveat these stats by saying I don't think this is truly representative of the total demand caused by alcohol, because by definition, informants wouldn't necessarily know that any perpetrators were under the influence. The 2 line graphs that you can see show the cumulative ASB figures over the last 2 years and the cumulative alcohol-related ASB figures over the last 2 years. And historically, what we tend to observe is the volume of alcohol-related ASB calls increased during the summer. However, actually, as you can see, at the moment, there's a slight decrease in the force area compared to last year. I'd like to think this is due to our targeted and proactive approach with our partners, the activity of our alcohol licensing unit and the neighbourhood policing teams, albeit I accept I'll be guarded against drawing too many comparisons on a binary basis. What I would also say is, whilst I think this is a positive, I'd echo what the PCC said in that anyone who is continuing to suffer from ASB related incidents or is witnessing ongoing antisocial behaviour, please report it to the appropriate agency, be it ourselves or be it to the various council departments, depending on what the nature of the incident is. Next slide, please. So our local spikes tend to be cyclical, and they're often highly correlated to particular events. No surprise to most, they tend to correlate with school holidays, with the end of educational exams, with Freshers' Week at the university, for example, with the festive period, with Miners' Gala, sporting events, and more recently with heat waves. And again, similar to the cyclical things, as you'd expect, there are specific actions in place with partners to mitigate and manage all these events. And again, we'll come on to our approach later in the presentation. The next slide I've called wicked issues. These are particularly thorny problems. So over and above the cyclical events, unsurprisingly, there's a particular concentration of alcohol-related ASB incidents in the urban centres, in Durham City and in Darlington in relation to street drinking. There's a specific acute issue of transient noise with the student population and local residents in Durham City. And on occasion, we see acute spikes. Again, this is often as a consequence of good weather and school holidays, but we've seen acute spikes in alcohol-related ASB in the Sands in Durham, for example, or at Oakey's Park in Stanley. And again, there are specific actions to mitigate and manage these issues. So I'll now hand you over to Vicky, who'll present on our approach to tackling these issues and how we work with partners to achieve the same.
Now, the next slide, please. Our approach is very much a partnership approach. We have the neighbourhood policing team and we have the licensed economy team, but we do a lot of work that's partnership led. It's really, I think our partnership working is really strong, and some of that is because of joint working. We have some of our police staff based at Annand House, which is at Meadowfield, and the council also have their staff there. So as well as those formal meetings, you have that chit chat as they see each other on a daily basis. So work very much with the local neighbourhood policing teams, because the local neighbourhood policing teams, they own the licensed premises. That's for both on and off licence. That's what I mean by that is they go in and they look at the licence conditions and make sure that the licensing objectives are being fulfilled. With the licensed economy team, they can't possibly visit every single licensed premises in the county because there's thousands of them. But they are the experts, and they're almost like a TAC advisor. They give the advice and guidance to the neighbourhood teams so that they can go out and do their job locally. There is a weekly shared intelligence meeting between the representatives from both Darlington Borough Council and Durham County Council to discuss premises and areas that they have concerns with and that we have concerns with. The licensing unit will then inform, advise and support the local neighbourhood policing team to give them that guidance about what they should consider and what actions they might be wanting to take. The emphasis for tackling underage drinking is very much on education and prevention with the young people, but we do have a no-nonsense, robust approach to enforcing premises, particularly those that are flouting the licensing conditions and selling alcohol to younger people. Next slide, please. With preventative measures, and we'll go into these in more detail as the presentation goes on. We have the education side and the work that we do with our partner agencies, and particularly referrals and critical pathways. We have projects running such as the Curve project, which targets young people, those that are just on the periphery of crime and starting to get into more serious trouble. And we have the Fearless project, which is partnership working funded from the Children and Young Persons budget with Durham County Council. And the Fearless project is a project, it's almost like Crime Stoppers, but for young people in schools. We have patrol plans and we work very much with the wardens from the council. We do a lot of media messaging in terms of what we put out and what the partners put out. And we engage with the checkpoint navigators and the youth offending team. Now, those teams primarily concentrate on youngsters that are involved with crime, but let's not forget a lot of those individuals have been involved and sometimes lead antisocial behaviour, and that is often alcohol led. Next slide, please. We have lots of literature out there, and these are just a couple of examples. You've got the Challenge 25 scheme, which I think is really well embedded and most people have heard of now, and young people just expect if they're buying alcohol and they look under 25, they will be challenged for valid ID. And also targeting those that are buying alcohol and giving it to the young people, just reminding them that is actually against the law. So, you know, just removing all those excuses for the what we call the proxy sales. Next slide, please. Right, with the education, because this is where it starts with the young people, we have PCSOs, partnership officers and alcohol harm coordinators. All schools and colleges get some input, but as you would expect, if we are getting a particular area with more issues being reported, we would give those schools and colleges more support and more engagement. We have stay safe operations, and for those of you that might not know what they are, Neil has talked about those before in the antisocial behaviour public accountability meetings. They're very intensive multi-agency operations that we run in an area if they are suffering from acute spikes in alcohol related ASB. What we do is we flood the area with neighbourhood policing staff, wardens and antisocial behaviour officers, round up underage drinkers and the trouble causers. They're then taken to a place of safety and their parents are invited to come and collect them. So this involves the parents in how we actually deal with this long term. They will be shown clear evidence of their child's actions and they will receive an input from social services and the youth offending service. They're particularly effective in quelling acute issues. However, they are so resource intensive, we have to use them sparingly. They work well, but it does involve a lot of work. And also we have mediation, we have strong relations with humankind and balance and public health. Can we move on? Right, just some of the partners that I mentioned there. First of all, often we're the first point of contact for long-term issues relating to antisocial behaviour and alcohol. So we have the engagement and the intervention from the MPT, the licence economy team, and harm reduction is active on a daily basis. That's what we're looking at, reducing the harm. Intervention ranges from officer presence, seizure of alcohol and safeguarding steps to and the referral to partner agencies and treatment provider. The licensing system is used in order to reduce the risk too. And then we get to Durham County Council and Darlington Borough Council. They have drug and alcohol referral services, and they're local authority based and provide a good link and good sources of information. We have environmental health, we have trading standards, licensing enforcement, the street wardens, the ASB officers, and the overarching alcohol and drug strategies are generated at a local authority level, and we feed into the ASB strategic board and this community safety partnerships. Humankind are the contracted alcohol referral service used by the council. They're trained alcohol and drug workers and look at everything from early intervention to problematic long-term users. You've got Balance North East, which is a charity-based agency who look to reduce risks and health issues caused by alcohol in society. They have regular harm reduction campaigns and provide academic data to support the strategies. And we also have Public Health, who provide data and trends associated with local and national issues, as well as academic studies as to the impact of alcohol on individuals. I mean, we've talked, we'll go into some more of the things on the slide there in terms of dispersal orders and patrolling as we go on and through the questions. Next slide, please. Sorry, yeah, I think we jumped ahead. Right, enforcement. We have community-based policing and intervention, and this is our bedrock to tackling both antisocial behaviour and alcohol-related nuisance. We touched on it earlier, but we've known issues or foreseeable issues of alcohol-related into ASB in addition to the preventative work, and there's always plans around enforcement. So examples in Durham City and Darlington town centres, we've lobbied hard for PSPOs. They are public space protection orders. And in relation to Durham, we understand that the conditions have been strengthened in the near future. That's what they're looking at, not just the alcohol issues, but the aggressive begging that Neil mentioned. There's significant police and partner enforcement in relation to seizing alcohol and the issue of fixed penalty notices on the same. In Darlington, there are well-established and routine joint visits to on and off licences with the SWIFT team doing enforcement, confiscation and issuing of fines, all of which help maintain the purple flag status incentive that they have running in Darlington town centre. In relation to transient student noise, the lead for that now sits with the CRT, which is the Community Response Team, and that is a funded initiative that we fed into, but it's funded by Durham University and Durham County Council. For the more annual issues that we've touched on, such as the school holidays, all the neighbourhood policing teams have patrol plans, and there are numerous test purchasing operations planned over the next couple of months to target premises that are selling alcohol to underage drinkers. But again, that will be evidence-led. We'll target our resources where we believe the problems to be. I've touched on the Stay Safe operation and explained what those are, but we also have dispersal orders, and these orders we can put in place and we can disperse people, and if they return within a certain time period to an identified area, we can take action. But again, with dispersal orders, I put a caveat on those. Dispersal orders are very much temporary solutions, and sometimes I think people think we should use them as a curfew just to keep young people off the streets, but we have to be really proportionate with that approach and make sure we're using them where they really make a difference and where they're needed. Next slide, please. Thought we'd talk a little bit about the MPT and the partner activity. We've talked a little bit about wardens, but just to emphasise that they have in the last 12 months made 200 seizures, which I think is quite significant. It might not sound like a huge number, but I think that's quite a lot because that's work that we haven't had to do. And that was just in Durham City alone. And also we have the test purchase operations, which will be ongoing over the summer holidays. Next slide, please. We've got a few figures here, and what I'll bring you to is, I mean, some of the figures there were impacted by COVID. So probably the best way to compare them is like 2018 and 19 to 2022. And the figures for 2022, just to remind you, those are the year to date. And I think this is a bit of work that we're quite proud of because we've undertaken some absolutely phenomenal work and a really robust, resilient and relentless approach taken by the licensing unit. There are only a small number of people who work in that unit, but they really have a dogged approach to how they do this and how they target those that flagrantly disregard the licensing objectives. So what you've got there is you can see the number of objections that we've put in and the number that have been withdrawn. And just to give an example of one recently where we've got Sergeant Dickinson in that unit, and she's become quite an expert. And that file that we put before the licensing committee was just, you've got to remember that we could be dealing here with nationally recognised barristers who are experts in their field, and the file, we had one example recently where the file it was so professional and so comprehensive that the feedback was that there was just no point trying to fight it, and that's because we've worked really hard over the years to get that level of professionalism and knowledge. So you can see the withdrawals, how they've gone up, as a statistic of those overall numbers. You can see how well that they're doing in that area at the moment. Next page, please.
Back to me. So I'd echo everything that Vicky said there. I think we should be really, really proud of the partnership working, of the work of the MPTs and of the licensing unit. We're really, really robust and no nonsense when people flagrantly disregard the licensing objectives. But I want to be clear here, this is people who disregard the objectives, who don't care who they're selling alcohol to. This isn't us as a constabulary being punitive to decent landlords or to decent premises owners who are trying to make an honest living. If there's honest mistakes, then we'll educate and we'll work with them. This is where premises really don't care about anyone else, and that is what causes a blight. So I'm fairly unapologetic when we get to that stance that we take a robust approach. There's a few examples here which I'd cite where alcohol has been where we can clearly draw the link between alcohol and ASB. So the first one, you may have heard, the Unions and Chaplain, which is at the Front Street in Concert. Throughout late 2021, there was a significant rise in ASB in addition to other offences of violence linked to those specific premises on Front Street in Concert. It was under constant scrutiny from our neighbourhood teams and from our licensing teams, and that resulted in the expedited reviews of both premises licences. In both cases, the licensing committee upheld our objections, and both premises licences were revoked, rendering the venues closed. Again, I'm fairly unapologetic. It was absolutely necessary that we did that, because these are premises and individuals that we had tried to work with but just weren't for budging, and it's right and proper that we police that robustly. Second example is Kelly's Newsagents from Ferry Hill. This was subject to neighbourhood scrutiny as a consequence of local residents complaining about underage sales of alcohol and tobacco in the early part of this year. And as a consequence, again, our licensing team opposed the granting of new premises licence, and that again was upheld, and the licences were refused. The premises subsequently lost its ability to sell alcohol completely, and clearly we've issued fixed penalty tickets to the owners. Again, this was informed by residents. They wanted action taken. We acted upon that accordingly, and we saw an immediate cessation of ASB linked to that premise. Another example I'd cite is Concert Cricket Club. This is a premise which was subject to scrutiny again from our alcohol licensing team and from our partners in environmental health due to ongoing ASB noise issues. And again, this was as a consequence of neighbourhood complaints. This wasn't the Constabulary being punitive. This was local residents highlighting this as an issue particular to them. So we tried mediation, but that didn't work. So when Concert Cricket Club applied for further hours of trade and wanted an extra bar on the land, we objected accordingly, as did our colleagues in environmental health, and a committee hearing was held. And that imposed much harsher restrictions, and actually, rather than being granted greater autonomy, their licensing conditions were much tighter. Licensing hours were curtailed, and again, this was as a consequence of local residents who also gave evidence in that hearing. And the final example I'd cite is Warden Lodge in Peterlee, which is an isolated premises that came under scrutiny by our colleagues in DCC for unlicensed activity during COVID, which we saw leading to an increase in ASB. And as a consequence of our engagement with MPT and the licensed economy team, when they applied for a premises license in 2022, we had all the evidence we needed to object based on the foreseeable likelihood of ASB and a potential negative effect on the local area. And again, this was upheld. So there are 4 examples of ASB clearly linked to on or off licensed premises where I think we have intervened as a consequence of local residents' complaints. Next slide, please. I'll conclude by a bit of a SWOT analysis. I think there's some really good practice. I think we've got really good understanding by our neighbourhood policing teams in terms of the policing of the licensed economy, by which I mean the policing of the conditions, the policing of the licensees, and what action needs to be taken. That's excellent coordination with the alcohol licensing team as those TAC advisors. The co-location with our partners at Ann and House, between the licensing teams from the council and ourselves, makes for excellent working relationships, as it does at Gladstone Street with Darlington Borough Council. I'm really pleased with the robust enforcement from the licensing unit and the expertise that's been developed there. We've also appointed an alcohol harm reduction officer, which will help enhance the educational and referral mechanisms to third parties. We've got increased school liaison capability as a consequence of working with Martin Stenson from the Children and Young Person Services, getting additional funding for that. I'm pleased with the neighbourhood wardens and their activity around Durham City. I hope that will be enhanced as their wardens' capacity is they're now back to capacity across the county. So I hope to see more warden seizures across the rest of the county. Excellent referral links to Humankind and Switch. And you'll be aware that we were successful in previous rounds of Safer Streets funding, and we've got things such as the Nighttime Hub, which again helps in terms of tackling ASB. Next slide, please. Areas for development. I think the data is not always as rich as it could be. I alluded to that when we talked about the stats. I think in terms of us taking our data, we predominantly get that from Storm data, which is our command and control, i.e. the calls that come into the comm centre. Our partners use a system called Okuma. It's often difficult to pull together and interface those two data sets, but we've got work in hand with our partners to try and get a richer picture and get some further disposal codes on Okuma, so we can get a much more granular understanding of what ASB incidents are. The staffing capabilities and trading standards for test purchasing operations. That was a particular problem over the COVID period because that involves under 18s and there was obviously restrictions there. But really a big concern is apathy and acceptance. Forgive me, I'm not sure if Vicky touched on it, but some of the seizures, we don't often publicise alcohol seizures widely. Be under no doubt, there's a number of seizure operations all the time by our constables and our PCSOs, and likewise our neighbourhood wardens. We don't often make a song and dance about that, because what we've seen on social media is it can be quite divisive and quite polarised, and some of the comments can actually be, well, you're spoiling all the kids' fun. That's a real cause of upset for us when we see adults or parents who are sort of ambivalent to that. So again, working with some of the coordinators and working with Humankind, it's a long-term thing, but we need to address some of that apathy and ambivalence in society. As I say, the seizures is a prime example of how society doesn't necessarily see it through the same lens as ourselves. Next slide, please. Opportunities. We've got further funding for Curve and from Fearless, as Vicky touched on. And I'm aware that from the PCC's office, a number of my neighbourhood inspectors have already applied for youth projects and interventions as part of the special fund that the PCC's put aside. So hopefully they will be granted and be successful in getting further youth projects and diversionary activities there. Recently, as a consequence of restructures, the executive have appointed a strategic harm reduction team led by Chief Inspector Emma Kay. I think there's going to be value there for looking at some of the long-term wicked issues that will help. Curve and Fearless, there's further funding again, as I've alluded to, and you'll be aware that we've put in for Safer Streets funding 4A. All of that is linked to ASB, and I'm very confident that those will be successful. And Safer Streets funding 4B is open to applications in the near future, and we'll be all over that, trying to maximise any money that we can get from the Home Office. Next slide, please. Threats, yeah, volunteers, a lack of for the TP operations. I think that's slowly getting online now. I spoke to my colleague Owen Clough from DCC, and I think he's got a decent cadre now. But those numbers waver. There's the user-only knowledge of proxy sales. We only know what we know and what the community tell us. And again, linked to the apathy, sometimes there's parental purchases and supply. That is also a threat to our strategy. But the last one in bold, which I'd highlight, there's sometimes things that we are left to police as a consequence of the larger macro economic picture. So the future economic licensing and planning strategy, we are left to police the consequence of that. That is a potential threat. We look, for example, at all the developments at the waterfront down in Durham City, and we look at the amount of bars, restaurants and licensed premises. We will be the ever-present 24/7, 365 going forward to police any fallout from that. So that is a potential threat that we need to be sighted on. And that concludes our presentation. So thanks for listening, and we'll now invite any questions.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive presentation. Before I move on, I just want to, Kieran, do you want to say anything just to conclude?
Yes, thank you, Joy. Thanks for the opportunity just to say a few words as the conclusion. As I said, it's such a complex and wide-ranging area of business that inevitably it did take us slightly beyond the 20 minutes. But hopefully, both the audience on the briefing and the public in more general terms will be grateful for the information provided by Neil and Vicky, and I'm very grateful for the work that they've done in pulling this presentation together. I think it does reflect the breadth and depth of activity that goes on across the force area, and I think Neil and Vicky have both demonstrated in terms of the operational activity that we do, but also some of those strategic threats that sit outside of policing that inevitably the police service, as many other public sector services, need to react to with the changing nature of our communities over time. But they're the closing words for me so far, and obviously more than happy to answer the public's questions.
Lovely, thank you. And as I said, thanks to Neil and Vicky for such a comprehensive presentation that demonstrates the extensive partnership working involved in addressing alcohol-related antisocial behaviour, and for setting out the tools and powers available to both the police and partners to tackle the issue and take action against the perpetrators. I'm sure that residents will have appreciated the force's robust and no-nonsense approach to those who selfishly disregard the licensing objectives, and the valuable role our licensing team play in enforcing the licensing laws and taking action against those who flout the law. I think in the presentation highlights to me the importance of the public. It highlighted the valuable role that residents play in sharing local intelligence that informs police operations, and the success in taking action against those to address alcohol-related ASB. So it's very much a partnership approach, and the public play a key role in helping us to address alcohol-related antisocial behaviour. So now I've got the questions I'm going to put to people individually. So the first question is, as a parish council, we feel there is a disparity between the level of service we get in more rural areas in comparison to the county's cities, towns, where tackling antisocial behaviour related antisocial behaviour. What is being done to address this disparity? And this first question I'm going to put to Neil.
Yeah, morning everyone. I think it's regrettable that the parish considered that disparity, and I dare contend that whichever area you sit in, you may compare and contrast and feel that others get a different service. I don't think that's the case, and certainly it's consciously not the case. What I would say is the Constabulary responds to any report of alcohol related ASB, or any other call for that matter, we use the same model. We use our Thrive model. So basically any response is graded in terms of the risk that we identify at that time. So whilst there might be a disparity in relation to the volume of what is reported to police in the more urban conurbations, that generate more related ASB calls, there's no inequitable. It's not inequitable. Speak English. It's not inequitable in the response. So all localities have a dedicated neighbourhood team. They've got specific responsibilities in terms of licensing and antisocial behaviour. And as a senior leadership team, we regularly look at performance data in the urban areas, in the rural areas, and in the urban fringes, and we absolutely maximise those ratio of cops to incidents to try and get the optimum use of resources and to try and make it as equitable as we can. What I would say is I'd encourage the author of that specific question to get in contact with their local NPT inspector. So the details of that we can explore further, because if there is a specific aspect that we can address, then we'd certainly be willing to look at that specific issue. But as I say, we use the same Thrive process, the threat harm risk. We use the same national decision making model for every incident. So it's the same mechanism that judges our response. But like I say, very open to any perceived dissatisfaction, because I'd like to close that loop.
Thanks for that, Neil, and I think that's a good offer of support. You know, I don't know if we know individually if the people who've left the questions leave the contact details, we do give them the response back. But I think we can get that message out to all our parish councils, and that the offer's there to have that discussion. But also equally important is we need to make sure that the people are reporting these things as well, because a lot of the time when we do ask the question, we haven't had the reports coming in, so it's happening but it's not being reported. So I think it's very good to give that response and to offer that support as well. The next question is, this is something that, again, we said that my team pulled some questions together. So there's the issues around Durham City come from residents on a regular basis. So this one, it came from a resident of Durham City, and it seems to them that it's getting noisier each year as the student population continues to grow. During term time, there are alcohol-fueled parties almost every night. How is this problem being addressed? Because there does not seem to be any progress made, and the problem only grows. Kieran, can you answer that question, please?
Yeah, of course, Joy. Excuse me. I mean, I think this probably starts us off with a reflection of those wider issues that we talked to. The growth in the university over the last 20 years has been significant, and set against, I think, a target of around 20,000 students. They exceeded that just prior to COVID, and now we're around about 21,500 students. And inevitably, that will put pressure on the infrastructure in and around the city of Durham. But it is not something that we, necessarily would comment upon. And of course, then inevitably we may see some tensions between non-student residents, complaining about the fact that students have taken over some areas in their view, and that behaviour is impacting on their own quality of life, having lived in the local area for the length of time that they have. I think it's important to acknowledge that from a policing perspective, many of these reports of noise nuisance and rowdy behaviour aren't necessarily targeted or personal antisocial behaviour efforts or attacks against a particular individual, but are more in the broader environment. And it's important really for me to point out that noise nuisance and the policing of it is the legal responsibility of the local authority, and the authority is funded through council tax and other funding mechanisms to promote, prevent and enforce noise nuisance related offending. And they have their own team which works alongside both the police and the university, and they have the primary role in relation to pursuing community protection warnings, community protection notices, other civil and criminal prosecutions where needed. It is, however, important to mention that the force works hand in glove with both the local authority and the university. Neil's already mentioned, and Neil and Vicky have already mentioned the community response team that the university have put together, and I think that they've funded that to the tune of £85,000 to provide that initial instantaneous response to this kind of noise nuisance at student-related properties. The university and the local authority would talk to a reduction in the past 12 months or so. Obviously, things were very quiet during COVID, with many students not present in the university city itself. But they would talk to a reduction from I think around about 120 call-outs during June 2021 to 26 in June 2022, which I think demonstrates the effect of the partnership working that has taken place during the course of the last two years as we've emerged from COVID. I think it's important really to pick that up, that it is a joint responsibility, and there's some joint activity, but the lead on that sits with the local authority. However, where things do become more serious, then clearly we do seek to become involved. And the university response, in fairness, they seek to respond within 30 minutes to noise nuisance complaints, which in the grand scheme of things is probably quite effective.
Thanks, Kieran. And I think one of the things for me as PCC, and it's actually in the police and crime plan, is the importance of signposting, because a lot of the time residents don't know who to turn to. So we do get calls coming into ourselves that you mentioned about noise nuisance, and we just need to flag up who's there and who does what, so people know who to contact in the first instance. But I think it's also reassuring that, you know, it is about a partnership approach. It's about the university, the police, the residents, the parish council coming together. I know that's a sort of an ongoing issue as we talk about the population increasing, and I know we've got other things sort of in train to address some of the issues within the city as well. If it goes forward with the public space protection order, you know, looking at some of the issues around that. So again, that's very much a partnership approach in mind of addressing residents' concerns as well. So the next question is, when does alcohol-related antisocial behaviour become a crime of harassment, and who do we call? There are mixed messages of who to contact: police, council or Crime Stoppers. And Vicky, can you answer that question, please?
Yes, I can, particularly that first bit. When does alcohol-related ASB become a crime of harassment? The short answer to that is nearly never. Just to give you a bit of context behind that harassment, I'll just give you the first bit of the definition, which should make it clearer. Every individual has a right to be free from harassment, and accordingly a person must not pursue a course of conduct which amounts to harassment of another and is either intended to amount harassment of that person or occurs in circumstances where it would appear to a reasonable person that it would amount to harassment of that person. So what it really means, it's got to be targeted. I mean, I did think about, what does that question mean? It perhaps has that come from somebody who lives next to a licensed premises, and when people leave every night, they feel that that's repeated behaviour and they may feel harassed by it. However, that doesn't make it harassment under that definition. So what you'd be looking at is something that's targeted at an individual, and it's that repeated and that intentional, or what would be to an outsider look intentional. And if it is harassment, that does need to be reported to the police, and the correct way to do that would be via the 101 number. But if it is a noise related issue and it's not that targeted behaviour, then that, as we've already touched on, that would be an issue for the local authority to deal with, and there's information on how to report that on the council website.
Thanks, Vicky. And again, the signposting is really important. And we can use the chat online function as well as ringing 101, and we've got plans in place to make it easier, more flexible to pass that information on. So I think that's very clear, and that's good advice given to that questionnaire. The next question is, how do the force tackle drinking in community parks and public spaces. Vicky, I'm going to ask you to answer that one again, please.
Yes, this is very much an operational question, so it falls right into my area of responsibility, and it's a proportionate and a staged approach. But I think first of all, what we need to realise is that drinking in public parks and public spaces isn't in itself illegal. So we have to make sure we have a proportionate and balanced approach, particularly when things are reported to us. And the example I always quote is, if you have a park, you may have a homeless person that's drinking in that park, and you might have a group of ladies who are having their bottle of Prosecco because it's a nice summer's day. And if that's all they're doing, that's fine, and we wouldn't treat them any differently. But if their behaviour fueled by that alcohol then starts to impact on the people around them, it doesn't matter who it's come from, our response would be the same, and that's when the police might start to have some involvement. So that involvement would start with engagement and education, and what that just plainly means is we'd have a conversation with the person, you know, what are you doing? Have you realised how your behaviour is impacting on the people around you? You might be frightening people, there might be children present. And then if that behaviour escalates, and something we talked about earlier in the presentation, we might have warnings or directions to leave for a period of time in relation to a specific behaviour. If that behaviour then progresses to drunk and disorderly, then we might start making arrests and, you know, really using those police powers. But what we do is we look at what's being reported and we gauge our response around where those problem areas are, and the hotspot policing and the neighbourhood policing teams will have plans in place for those areas. We've talked about already about working in partnerships with the wardens, with the council to address those environmental issues. We've touched on the public space protection orders, the PSPOs, and where those are in place, it isn't okay to just be carrying alcohol around in open containers, but there are powers that goes with those orders. And as Neil's already touched on in relation to the alcohol seizures, we don't widely publicise those. We don't want to inadvertently identify young people who are seeking to educate. And certainly we don't want to start advertising to people that's where you want to go for a good time, and you'll be able to sit around and have a drink and annoy people. So I don't want people to think that we're not out there safeguarding particularly young people who might be drinking, because we are, but because of the reasons already outlined in terms of how do we make sure everybody's got a corporate message here, that we're all on the same page. We're not going to be putting that stuff all over our social media. It is happening, rest assured, but we don't publicise that. But it is just to make sure everybody is in agreement. You know, we are tackling the issues where they're reported from.
Thanks, Vicky. And I think I really would like to thank the resident that put that question, because the answer that you gave demonstrated, you know, it's not a one size fits all. It's very much proportionate, supportive, safeguarding. There's a lot of issues that you take into account when you do that. So I think the resident has asked a really good question there, but a very comprehensive answer again. Thank you. The next question is, why do PCs and PCSOs not target antisocial behaviour hotspot areas? Kieran, can you respond to that question, please?
Yeah, yes, of course. I mean, I think the presentation that Neil and Vicky have worked through over the last hour or so, and the answers to the previous questions, I think demonstrates that the entirety of our neighbourhood policing model, which is effectively the bedrock of the way in which we deliver policing services across Durham and Darlington, is absolutely predicated on tackling high harm activity, both high harm in the sense of offenders and also in the sense of the harm caused to victims, and we do that through tackling our repeat offenders, our repeat locations, and really looking to listen and respond to the things that matter to our local communities, and we do indeed target our ASB hotspot areas. And I think we could demonstrate that with significant amounts of evidence, both in terms of how we are represented insofar as our local work with communities, the problem solving activity that we do, and also in terms of how we stand up in relation to national assessment and so on through HMIC. So I'm hopeful that the updates that we provided during this session have demonstrated that this simply isn't the case, and that we do demonstrate that focus on tackling problems across the force area, and we take action specifically around alcohol fueled ASB, and we do that in the same way that's reflective of other areas of ASB, those sort of nuisance and environmental matters, in particular the personal antisocial behaviour, which Vicky's talked a little bit about in relation to the question around harassment, as we work really hard in those areas. Now, of course, we can't be on every street corner at every moment of the day and night. So it may seem to certain people across our communities that we aren't tackling the issues that are alive to them. We are always gathering intelligence. We're always gathering information. We work with our partners tirelessly to help us understand where the problems are. And often as well, we are working in the background. So many of our PCSOs in particular will attend local youth clubs and be involved in diversionary activities with young people and adults. We are present at community meetings providing updates on the work that we're doing, and we're also looking to tackle the most significant antisocial behaviour causes through civil, criminal orders, seeking injunctions, etc. Even, most recently, activity down at Newton Aycliffe saw 3 of the most prominent antisocial behaviour offenders put into jail because of their behaviour over an extended period of time. And we can give similar examples in all of the 4 corners of the force area. So it's really important for me to emphasise and state that we do tackle and target the problem areas and those hotspots, and we work tirelessly to ensure that we are reducing the impact of antisocial behaviour across those areas. Now, a bit like the answer to the previous question from Neil, if the person or group of people who pulled together questions along this theme, if we can get them in touch with the local neighbourhood inspector, just really to help give them a better overview of what we do on a local level. We're doing that considerably with our local councillors to give them the sense of what is going on. We produce newsletters and such like to try and give that flavour of what we're doing. But if we're not reaching out far enough, then by all means, we'd like to reach out further and have contact with those individuals to help them understand what we are doing.
Thanks, Kieran, and I'm really pleased you mentioned the Aycliffe example, because I was there last night, and it was great to report on. The council were really pleased that I was able to report that antisocial behaviour was down 43%, and youth-related antisocial behaviour was down 20% year to date. And it was very much the partnership approach that we've said throughout this presentation. The Aycliffe Town Council, the local county councils, the housing, police have been really working in looking at targeted information, encouraging residents to share, investing in technology like mobile CCTV, and it was really well received last night. And to go to a town council where you can see, what you're saying today was evidence last night. Is actually, this is how it works on the ground. If you get everybody working together, picking up their own particular areas, it can work. It's not easy because there is a revolving door as well, but it's that constant working together, collective response that really gives us these results. So I think that's very timely that we've got that, but you can see it. What we're saying is actually in action in those communities. I think
I would say, Joy, that wasn't for the benefit of the public watching this. That wasn't scripted. I think what it did reflect is that I could have given an example from Sacriston, from Concert, from Chastler Street, from Stanley, from Peterlee at the east, down in Darlington, and I could have given examples for all of those areas. And I just think reflects how hard our neighbourhood teams are working in that space in conjunction with partners, which I think is really important to not underscore that part of it as well.
Yeah, and it is good when you can have that response, and I think partly it's when people get round the table together that can have that. So we use that as, like you said, other examples we can share as well in different examples. So I think that this is my final question from local residents. It's does the force, and I think we touched upon this in the presentation, but it's just obviously it's a very specific question from this resident. Does the force still do test purchasing for alcohol? If so, how do they know it works? And I think Vicky, this is going to ask you the final response here, please.
Just for anybody that might be watching this that doesn't know what a test purchasing for alcohol is, it's when we send somebody into a licensed premises who clearly looks under 18. They're normally 16, but they will clearly look under 18 to see if they can purchase alcohol in those premises. Now, we are not going out there to try and trip premises up that are behaving responsibly, because we're very much about supporting the economy as it's bouncing back after COVID. But what we are seeking to target is those that are operating irresponsibly with a total disregard to the safeguarding of young people. So they are always intelligence led. So just to remind you that the Constabulary lead in relation to on sales, which is your pubs and clubs. We can walk in there, we can have a look at who's in there, what's the age of them. But the County Council leads for off sales, which is off licensing, which is where we run these operations. And the council, it's the Trading Standards Department that take the lead on these operations. They use 16-year-olds, and they will try more than once. And depending if it's one fail, if it's more than one fail, there is a staged approach that the council will have to how they deal with it. And whether that premises may even lose its licence to serve alcohol. Does it work? It's a difficult one because we can't show what we've prevented, but we can show what happens when places don't comply. We can see that in the behaviour of the young people around the premises. But how we know it's working is if somewhere continues to just flout the law, they will lose their licence. Some of the activity did cease during COVID because we couldn't get the young people to help the council, but they are ongoing again. And the most recent activity was on the 18th and 19th of July. And the council targeted a number of premises. It was 12 tests were completed, and there was a 25% failure rate, and the council will be engaging with those premises in relation to those failures. But I'll bring you back to what I said right at the beginning of the presentation about the co-location of the council and the police resources. Being all in one building, we get information in from the public, and if they do know about things like this, please ring us 101 or get in touch with your local neighbourhood team who can feed the information in. But we're having conversations every day with the council, so that information sharing is very much quick time, and it's something that we will be repeating and the council will be repeating throughout the summer. So any further information would be greatly received either to ourselves or the council.
Thanks, Vicky, and I think it's sort of what touches upon what Neil said and what you've just sort of supported. Maybe something that our office can do is in encouraging young people to come forward to help with the test purchases, to help the agencies do that valuable piece of work that has a really good community benefit. So that really brings me to the end of this accountability meeting, and I do hope that the presentation delivered and the questions that have followed have been useful for those watching. The key headlines for me are that we take the response for all forms of antisocial behaviour seriously, and we really encourage the public to report all forms of antisocial behaviour. I understand the cumulative impact of drug and alcohol related antisocial behaviour has on victims, businesses, residents, etc., and the importance of ensuring that all our victims of antisocial behaviour have access to victim services and advice through VCAS and community peer mentors. We will continue to work with the police and local partners such as Durham County Council and Darlington Borough Council to ensure that all members of the public and victims of antisocial behaviour know how and where to report antisocial behaviour incidents. Antisocial behaviour is a key priority in our police and crime plan, and it's a #1 priority having consulted the public. and we're actively looking to support a range of initiatives and problem-solving approaches to tackle and reduce antisocial behaviour in the areas most affected by this serious problem. For example, investing in high-tech CCTV solutions to act as a deterrent and to identify and bring to justice those that commit antisocial behaviour, and also youth engagement schemes to divert young people away from committing antisocial behaviour. And we touched upon this with the support of our neighbourhood teams to work with partners to look at youth diversionary schemes in their own local areas. I'm also working with the force to develop a best practice approach to the community trigger, an antisocial behaviour case review for all victims of antisocial behaviour. As Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm also committed to tackling antisocial behaviour and have appointed an antisocial behaviour champion to better understand the victim impact and to encourage reporting in an area that is acknowledged to be highly likely to be underreported. I think this is estimated to be 54% of antisocial behaviour that occurs isn't being reported. And so I really urge residents to use the 101 system and to report antisocial behaviour if it's noise related or council related, to report it into the relevant council departments as well. Alcohol continues to be a driver for offending and increased vulnerability. This issue, alongside associated mental health issues, are cross-cutting issues that continue to significantly impact upon demand across all areas of police and partner services. And it's something that we're very, very keen to get a grip of, to understand the impact and to put the right solutions to address these really growing problems in this particular area that are a concern to us all. We work also closely with partners to support the issue of key tools to reduce the impact of alcohol-related incidents and antisocial behaviour, often as a result, as we've talked about today, linking to the nighttime economy. For example, the implementation of alcohol-related PSPO, which is Public Space Protection Order in Durham City, which will ban the drinking of alcohol in public spaces. As we talked about today, our licensing team continues to work with all licensed premises, ensuring they're holding the licensing objectives in relation to selling alcohol, whether this be underage sales of alcohol or whether it be selling to intoxicated persons. The team also support and link with Durham County Council and Darlington Borough Council around underage sales in off-licensing to combat shop owners that breach this. The unit can then conduct reviews, Section 53 reviews where necessary, to revoke licensing or add conditions. Durham County Council has invested in drug and alcohol awareness coordinator, as we've talked about. This role focuses on school education and awareness, partnership working and liaison with all agencies such as public health, balance, local treatment services to aid information in intelligence sharing and the management of young persons' alcohol referral scheme and seizures. I, as Police and Crime Commissioner, acknowledge the impact that alcohol-related antisocial behaviour has on the nighttime economy and the victims that live in those areas, that's in our towns and city centre. They are often repeat victims from issues such as noise nuisance, issues in Durham City and increasing student population, again, as we've talked about today, and something that we're working very closely together to address. I'm looking to develop a strategy around empathy, education, engagement and enforcement, building on the success of the Darlington model and tackling violence against women and girls and developing a safe space approach to safety in the nighttime economy. I'll give residents a commitment that I will continue to support and develop the Safer Streets funding from central government to support antisocial behaviour and violence against women and girls initiatives. Alcohol continues to be a driver for offending and increased vulnerability. This issue, along with associated mental health issues, are cross-cutting issues that continue to significantly impact upon demand across policing areas. I would like to reassure all the residents of County Durham and Darlington that I will continue to work with the Chief Constable and partners to engage and empower communities to play an active role in crime prevention, increase the levels of crime reporting, particularly in our rural communities, and report intelligence and resolve local issues that matter most to all our communities. This is across all sections of my police and crime plan. Policing should be intelligence-led and data-driven, and I'm committed to making it easier, faster and more convenient to report crime and antisocial behaviour, giving residents the confidence and reassurance they need to report issues. Finally, I'd once again like to thank the Deputy Chief Constable and his team for their participation in this presentation today relating to alcohol-related antisocial behaviour, and I commend the team for their detailed presentation and response to the residents' questions related to this issue. Thank you, and thank you for everybody for sending the questions in, and also for the team for providing such a robust and comprehensive response.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stop the recording there.